Hi, my name is Martin. I'm a driver coach specializing in open formula. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 2026 F1 regulations, but crucially, what are the driving techniques required to unlock these cars? Who's it going to suit? Who's it going to not suit? We're really going to get into what's the implication of the new rules on the driving technique. The video is going to start out quite basic, but it's going to get into a lot more detail as we move through. We've got your questions at the end as well. This is not going to be a quick 8-minute video with the sexy B-roll and the Mercedes driving past and all that sort of thing. No, it really is going to be focused on the technical side of the driving technique with regards to the 2026 regulations. If you're interested in what my thoughts are, definitely keep watching. Welcome back to the channel, guys. I hope you're going well and I hope you're ready to get into it. Let's start with just my initial thoughts and initial reaction to the regulations. So we've got smaller cars, we've got lighter cars, we've got cars with less downforce and a lot more power. For me, this is tick, tick, tick. This is the direction that I think F1 needed to go in. And I think this sort of direction also shines a light more on the driving technique. Pull away some of the downforce, give them heaps of power, make it a challenge and a struggle, take away the grip and increase the power, make it a challenge and a struggle. And then smaller and lighter cars' ability to follow is a little bit better and so on. For qualifying, I think it'll be great. Like I say, a super fun challenge with regards to traction, long braking zones, which we'll get onto in a minute, decreasing radius, like long entries as well, just generally less grip all round. And like I say, I think it's going to be easier to follow within the race as well. The problem with the race that I see though is that, and we'll get into it as well, it is going to be a lot about the battery. And I think the battery, like there's two things you've got to look at, the regs and the weight and the dimensions and the aero and the driving style for that. But then what the battery requires and demands, and that there could be an intersection there, or one might over prioritize the other. I think the battery is going to be very important. So harvesting the battery, deploying the battery, driving with the battery, managing the turbo lag, there's all of that, ICE discussion as well. So I think that'll be a challenge, but in qualifying, that takes a back seat. You've got full battery and you can just go for it. So I think that will present a big challenge for the drivers. And then finally, there's no more DRS as the overtaking mechanism. Your overtaking mechanism is now manual override mode. And essentially that's access to extra battery. I think that'll be problematic and we'll get onto that a little bit later as well. So look, we'll start with the dimensions and weight of the cars. So lighter, smaller, more nimble, as you can see. The weight of the car is reduced by 30 kilos. The width is reduced by 10 centimeters. So that's across this way. And then the wheelbase is reduced by 20 centimeters as well. That smaller wheelbase by 20 centimeters, I think that's huge. If you've been following and you can recall back to 2007 cars, there was a slight difference between the 2007 McLaren and Ferrari. I think the Ferrari had slightly more wheelbase length and it was 3.5 centimeters longer than the McLaren was the Ferrari. So the McLaren was a lot more agile in like Monaco, they got pole there. Canada was a lot better through slow speed chicanes. Whereas on the faster tracks like Silverstone and Spa, the Ferrari had a bit more stability. That was a 3.5 centimeter shift. This is a 20 centimeter shift in wheelbase. So it's huge. I think therefore we're going to end up with more agile cars. They're going to be better on direction change. Probably a little bit less stable in the high speed, not just for this reason, but for aerodynamic reasons as well. And don't forget, they're going to be flying in with the cars that got less drag, less downforce. They're going to be flying into these high speed entries and then have, smaller, lighter cars as well. So it is going to be like stability in the high speed could be a challenge. But I think in the low speed, they'll be able to navigate tracks like Monaco and Singapore a lot better as well. If you remember 2007, Lewis Hamilton's pole in Stowe corner, the car's like dancing around under him. It's moving under him. Doesn't necessarily cost him lap time because they weren't ground effect, highly aero dependent cars and he could get away with things like that. Hopefully these regs also promote that. Again, I like to see the movement in the cars and the drivers working away at the steering wheel rather than just go through the corner. No, faster downforce is doing all of the work. I think that takes away from it. With these lighter, smaller cars, again, there's less turbulence as well, so it's going to be easier to follow. The smaller car doesn't do as much damage through the air, and you having a smaller car behind, you can offset your line a little bit more as well. They're just going to be a lot better in that area, so I think we'll see closer racing with the less turbulence. and we'll see, like, in generally speaking, a lot more fun with these cars. I think the weight, like I say, they're just reduced by 30 kilos is very significant as well, because that's not just going to help in terms of straight line speed, but you've got to brake that weight, you've got to corner that weight, you've got to accelerate that weight, direction change that weight. So bringing that down by 30 kilos, again, it kind of, the story is going in one direction with the smaller, lighter, more compact, more agile and nimble cars. I think the starting fuel as well drops from 100 kilos down to 70. I'm not sure if that's taken into the weight that I've got here on the graphic. So the car, like fuel for fuel, the car should be 30 kilos smaller as well, because dimensions and so on, it's a smaller car. But then if they start, they're more efficient as well. So if they start the race with 30 kilos less fuel, 100 kilos down to 70, then that's a 60 kilo change at the start of the race. I think that's, if I'm reading that correctly, I think that's the way. So like the sluggish first couple of laps that we normally get when the cars are full of fuel and they look a bit slow, and you know, it's very passive and they're very easy to overload tires, and the cars are just like, just not racing almost. Hopefully with that, you know, decrease in weight plus the decrease in fuel that they're going to carry, you know, they're going to be quick straight away. So that'll be really interesting to see as well. I think mechanically, and that's what we're looking at here, weight and dimensions, I think it's a step in the right direction, and definitely we're going to get more grip, mechanical grip, better in direction change, better in slow speed, better in Monacos and so on. Aero is really interesting because that's where I think they're not going to be as capable as the current cars. But again, I'm all for that. Presents a driving challenge and an opportunity for us. In addition to that, we've also got smaller tires. Goes without saying, a smaller car, you want to keep everything in proportion and fit a smaller tire. So the tire dimensions are now smaller. I'm just reading on the bottom left. To create the latest set of regs, the wheel rim is still 18 inches, but the tread width, so the width of the tire, is 25 mil less at the front and 30 mil less at the rear. The total diameter is 15 mil less at the front and 10 millimeter at the rear. As I read that, the first thing that comes to my mind is that it's 25 mil less at the front and it's 30 mil less at the rear. So straight away I see a discrepancy there, and I'm like, is that going towards more front grip or is that going towards more rear grip? What's the percentage that they've pulled those two tires back? And therefore, which axles are going to push more towards understeer or oversteer and so on. So I did a quick Excel just to work out the percentage change. So you can see that on the screen in front of you. There's 2025, 2026, the difference now that we're pulling out of the tires, and then the percentage change. You can see the front changes smaller by 8.2%. and the rear 7.41. So there's more front coming out of the car, more front tire width. Again, I think that's the way to go, because I just spoke about them being maybe a handful on some of the entries in the high speed. If they took equal portions out, then, you know, it'd just be too much front in a way. And I think that with the lighter cars and smaller cars, they're already going to be agile enough anyway. So then I think this is done on purpose. I'm not all in on that, but I just feel like that's a very deliberate thing to pull away a bit more of the percentage of the front than the rear. The really important thing to call out with these slimmer tires as well is I think that you'll be able to save the car a little bit more in moments when you lose the rear, for example. Right now, as at 2025, when the car is gone, it's gone. It snaps so viciously. And that's a combination of the tire width that we have, the weight of the cars, the rear ground effect, how aero sensitive they are, and just generally once they're gone, they're gone. That's what makes Max's save in Spain so god tier, because he was on a hard compound and he was coming through the final corner and got the slide and then corrected it, like excellent. But most of the stuff you see is like Lewis's 2025 Abu Dhabi crash down at turn 9, I want to say, the long corner of turn 9, the left-hander. With these tires though, you'll be able to dance a little bit, like, and obviously it won't be quick, but the car won't be in the wall, you know what I mean? So you'll be able to just feel that out. There'll be a lot more movement in the cars than what you see. Normally you see them now glued or in the wall. Now you're going to see that shade of gray in the middle where there's a bit of movement, but it's not dangerous per se. So this image here was from 2012, I want to say, and it's quite famous. It's Schumacher in Singapore, turn 1, 2, 3 complex. And you see the moment that Michael gets here, but because of the skinny tires and, you know, the light cars, nimble, he's actually able to save this and straighten the car up. You would not be able to do that with the 2025 regs. So what I'm saying is we're a step more in this direction. The cars are a lot more savable. and just a lot more agile and less chance of losing the cars completely into the wall. So it's at this point, before we start to talk about aero and everything, where I just feel like we can stop here at the mechanical changes. And I want to talk to you guys about how I think this will affect Lewis Hamilton, because this is a question I've been getting a lot on my social medias. What do you think? Is Lewis going to be back? And so on. So let me give you guys the context. I think one of Lewis's biggest strengths and weapons is his ability to brake late and hard and carry speed to the apex and be last at the late breakers, and just ability to modulate and feel that brake and feel the right moment for braking with the right rate of input and so on. And this year he struggled with that because, again, if the car steps out, it's all over, the corners completely over, so you can't afford that. The problem with it was this year that it would pitch the car, upset the aero platform, minimum speed drops out of the car, like it's a complete disaster. I have a video on this. I'll link it in the description below as it pertains to Lewis and his driving technique and these cars. And so these cars favor a more traditional, geometric, gentle, introduce the car, be patient with the car, don't do too much with it. I think with the lighter cars and smaller cars, and the aero top speed that we're going to get into, I think it does create these long, drawn-out braking zones. Remember, we don't have much downforce, but we've got heaps of power and smaller cars and heaps of battery and heaps of straight line speed. So you do get these long, drawn-out braking zones. So I feel like one of Lewis's strongest tracks was Canada, for example. Canada is essentially the direction that we're taking these regulations. Canada is very low downforce, long straights, and it's characterized by these long braking zones into tight chicanes, for example. Similar to Monza in a way. I think Canada is probably a better description of it. And that's what we're going to have next year, 2026. We're going to have cars with the active aero. We'll talk about it. But, you know, long, high speed down the straight, and then long braking zones where you need to modulate the brake pedal. I think that side of things will definitely suit Lewis a lot more this year. I've always thought, though, that like Lewis's inability to adapt this year was a mark against him for me. It's like, it's kind of not good enough to say, oh, the regs didn't suit me. That's it. It's all over. Do you know what I mean? You've got to be able to, does this work? Does this work? Why doesn't this work? What if we did this? Like, you've got to be able to adapt regardless of what it is, whether it suits you or doesn't suit you. You've got to be able to play the ball per se. You've got to be able to play the conditions. So I think it will naturally suit Lewis, which is fine, and he should be okay in that regard. But I'd also say Lewis needs to do a step himself as well, because there will be challenges, there will be problems, there will be things he has to work through. I just hope he's up for that challenge and that battle, because the problem-solving process is the solution. Like, it's I'm more process-focused than I am outcomes-focused for Lewis. So I hope he sees it that way as well for his sake, and I hope he understands the importance that it's not just either going to suit him or not suit him. He's also going to have to come to the table and be open-minded and make tweaks and changes where possible. But that being said, we're coming more towards the Lewis Hamilton direction. We're coming more with the emphasis on low grip, braking zones, long braking zones, and yeah, just cars that generally move around a little bit more underneath you. Now, like I said at the start of this video, that's the qualifying picture, but there's also the race picture where the battery might dictate the driving techniques and driving styles. So we'll get onto that a little bit later, but that's just worth calling out as well. I'm talking from a qualifying lens here for Lewis, where he can attack his braking zones and he's not limited by a battery charge, for example. And I could be wrong there. There might be intra-lap battery charging that you have to do as well. And so that might look like lifting and coasting into certain braking zones to give you more power later on in the lap with the battery. I don't actually know that at this point, but that could be a thing, which would make it even more interesting. But yeah, as it stands, I'm just going to separate the two and say that in qualifying, you should be able to go more or less like proceed up to your braking point, hit your braking point, get your long drawn out braking zones, and, you know, deploy your battery fairly strongly throughout the lap. And in the race, obviously, it's going to be a lot more lift and coast and management and brake charge and state of charge and so on. If that does cross over and bleed into qualifying, then you're looking at a totally different technique. Yeah, you're looking at someone who can lift at the right points, brake at the right points, at the right amounts, and charge the battery in a certain way. That it just depends on how much capacity the battery has and how much deployment the track has and how much the system, the MGU-K, can recharge, and whether or not it's worth it, basically. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have all those details, but just something to keep in mind as we go through and talk about Lewis and his technique. Now, the thing is, even if the regs suit Lewis from the mechanical side, like we said, there's still other gaps in that Ferrari team. You know, the one that jumps off the page for me is Riccardo Adami, his race engineer, the communication struggles. Are they on the same page? Do they problem solve well together? Do they set up the car well? The strategy, there's still a lot of boxes that need to be ticked. Even if the car is good and it suits Lewis, competition is so good out there that you're racing against Adrian Newey, George Russell and Mercedes, you're racing against Max and GP. You've got really good competition out there, and you got Charles on the other side of the garage as well. Everything has to be tick. The regs have got to suit you. You've got to adapt to them. You've got to have a good strategy and a good race operations team and understand car setup and do the sim work. And it's all has to be there. You can't just take one of those pieces. It all has to be there. So the reason I'm raising this to you is saying, like, even if it suits Lewis, I don't know if the team's up for it. That we'll wait and see what happens there. Okay, so that's the mechanical side discussed. Let's start to talk about the aero and the aero balance, because as an open formula coach, this is key for me, because open formula is the intersection of mechanical vehicle dynamics principles and things that Rob starts to talk about, Rob Wilson, that is, driver coach, and the aerodynamics tied into that as well, which is really important. These are not cars that don't have aero, clearly, so it can't just be about the vehicle dynamics side. And this is where sometimes I've been critical of Rob. All his vehicle dynamics principles and all his coaching principles are great. They all work. They all hold true. But what you've got to do is overlay downforce on top of that and then see how the driving technique plays out. For example, when downforce is significantly active, you can smash the brake pedal. You'd be wasting time if you're introducing the car to the brake pedal, for example, even a fraction of a second. Or when downforce is significant, you're coming out of a high-speed corner, yeah, you can just nail the throttle on the exit because the downforce is with you. It would be slow to introduce the car to the throttle pedal, for little things like that, right? So I'm picking at details here. But this is why we need to talk about the aero rules, the aero balance, the downforce of the cars as well. So this is where Max is at his best, in my opinion. This is Max's biggest strength, is when the downforce is significant, strong and active, highly active, like in sets of S's, for example. I just feel like Max is a monster. The guys that highlight their favorite track as Spa, which to my knowledge is Max and Oscar, you know, these are your downforce merchants. These are the ones that are kind of hate street circuits and hate low grip. It's a waste of time and they struggle in those conditions. They just want to fire the car into Puon with the downforce, for example. The problem now in 2026, downforce is reduced by 30%. So we've got more power, more battery, smaller cars, lighter cars, and less downforce to go with it as well. With that 30% less downforce, drag is reduced by 55%. Again, that just means straight line speed, that things are going to be flying in a straight line, not to mention the active aero, which we haven't spoken about as well. So like I say, this helps the straight line speed. I think in terms of dirty air and following, this helps as well. I had a conversation with Ian Wright, ex-vehicle performance consultant for Mercedes, and we were talking about following and dirty air and attack and defense and so on. And I was like, the problem is downforce. Like that big, dirty downforce, the cars just can't follow. If we just took that back, you know, that's solved most of our problems. And he rightly came back to me and said, but what is Formula One without downforce? Like, you need downforce for it to be F1, but it's got to be done in the right way, like clean downforce, healthy downforce. It's just an engineering challenge and problem. And we kind of both had points. I was kind of right in saying if we brought it down, we'd be a step in the right direction. And he was also right in saying, well, it's the way you generate the downforce as well. So I think following in dirty air, which adds to the dimension increase and the tires and everything as well, will be a lot better with the less downforce that we have. The implication of less downforce is less cornering speed, obviously, and the grip in the high-speed corners is going to be a challenge. Like I said, even when the cars are going to tear down some short straights, like think about Puon, for example. The straight before Puon in Spa is not huge, but the cars are just going to accelerate down to Puon so quickly and so rapidly that, yeah, you'll be firing into those corners. So I think grip in the high-speed corners will be a challenge because of the speed that you're arriving at and the lack of downforce that you have when you get there. So the corners that jump off the page are like Puon, Stowe, Copse, 130R in Silverstone, maybe even Eau Rouge as well. Like, they're not going to be easy flat. If you arrive at Eau Rouge at 330 with no grip, no downforce, it'll be a challenge. So it makes these corners back to being corners, which I think is good. Crucially, the aero is now generated less from the floor compared to this year. So it was all about floor, diffuser, underbody, ground effect era. That's been reduced. Downforce is now coming more from the upper elements, the wings and so on. So the implication of that is the cars are less mercurial, being it either works or it doesn't work. You either get heaps of grip or no grip. There's going to be that more gray area like we spoke about before. So with these aero regs, like I say, they create the long drawn out braking zones, which I think will suit Lewis, and he'll love that in qualifying. I think it will also suit Lando in quali more than it will Oscar. We've already documented Oscar's braking struggles on this channel. He spoke about them to the guy Tom on that podcast, and he was saying, like, I'm not really an active braker. I have my braking point, I hit my braking point, and I want it to be as late and as hard as possible. And it is what it is. And he struggles to kind of adapt and modulate depending on what grip he gets. I definitely prefer that approach, the latter approach. So not committing so hard to the braking point, but being more flexible, more open-minded, more Lando Norris. What do I get? How much grip do I have? Do I need to hold on to them a bit more? Do I need to squeeze them a bit more? Maybe I'll pull a downshift. Maybe I'll come out of the brakes and turn in and carry speed and roll into the corner. You got so many more options when you're not at the last possible second. Because when you brake at the last possible second, you got to hold on to that brake pedal. You can't let go of it. Whereas Lando can let go and go in. I think that's a lot better. So these regs, like I say, with the low downforce, they shine more of a light in qualifying on long braking zones and braking points and braking techniques as well. So I think we're going to see that show up. I'll put a link to that video in the description below, the struggles that Oscar had in those races like Mexico, for example, in case you're interested in watching it. So while we're on the topic of aero, I think it's really important to discuss the aero balance as well. So what I mean by aero balance, it's the balance of the car, the way it shifts from low speed when downforce is not so significant, it's just not doing too much, to the high speed when downforce is super significant and active. What is the balance of the car? If I can jump you guys over to the whiteboard, I'll show you guys now what I'm talking about. So in 2025, this year, you'll know, for example, the Red Bull had a lot of understeer, and I should define this graph to you. Anywhere here is understeer, anywhere here is oversteer, and as the speed builds that way, then that balance can obviously change. So in the slow speed, Max kept complaining all year about understeer. But then when the speed built on the car, he found a more neutral balance here, and a balance he was happy with, even it was probably a little bit pointy, a little bit oversteer. So the Red Bull's aero balance went something like that. Whether or not it was linear or it went like that or it went like that, it doesn't really matter to me. The key thing is it's slow speed understeer, and once the downforce built, the balance shifted, it became a little bit more neutral. This is what McLaren was so good in 2025, is they solved for this. They didn't have the slow speed understeer. It was more like here, like a neutral balance in the slow speed, and it actually went more towards oversteer in the high speed. We've got so many videos documented on this channel about the entry oversteer that Lando was getting in high speed entries. I'll show a couple to you guys now, just in case you're not on the same page. This one from the final race, practice Abu Dhabi. Again, there's your oversteer. Oh, look, I've got them all here. So then the high speed entry into Spain. Hopefully there's a couple more. Yeah, turn 22 in Saudi. Yeah, same problem. So this is why the aero balance of the McLaren was very on the nose in the high speed. So is that it? Yeah. So then just going back to the whiteboard, like that's how it was. Now the question is, what is this picture going to be in 2026? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. Whatever it is, it is. You've got to pretty much be aware of it and solve for it. So Red Bull all year we're trying to solve for the slow speed understeer. If I had to guess, I'd say that we've got lighter cars, smaller cars that aren't generating that much downforce anyway at the slow speed. I think the balance will be pretty good. I think it'll be pretty neutral at the slow speed. So all through here, the lower speed ranges, I think the balance will be good. How it will go as the speed builds, I just think there won't be much grip. And like I said, the corners that we spoke about before, like Pouon, Stowe, Copse, 130R, Eau Rouge, it could be both. Like it could be in some cases oversteer or understeer. I just think there's not going to be great grip at those speeds. So I think they're solving for that is going to be the challenge. I think the cars will be quite healthy here in terms of the slow speed, the direction change, and so on. So I think that won't be a trouble. But I think here, just given the speed they're firing in at here and the lack of grip and the lack of downforce, yeah, that'll be a challenge. And depending on the corner type, you get either oversteer or understeer. So now that we've got a picture of the Aero, like I said, and that was Max's biggest strength, I think pulling that Aero back a little bit does kind of handcuff Max a little bit. That's one of his weapons. Like Max through a set of S's is mega. He keeps his foot flat in parts that other drivers can't keep their foot flat. But then in terms of the light, agile, nimble cars that are going to be better in slow speed direction change, that's actually going to help Max quite a lot, because I've always thought he had a bit of a weakness in that area, like a slow speed direction change into a long corner across a significant track width, struggled a lot with understeer, which the car had, but couldn't find driving solutions to it either. You'll recall Silverstone turn 3 and 4. I showed a video this year on the channel. I'll show it to you guys in a sec now. But in Hungary, he's always like, a -5 brake balance, the thing doesn't turn. In Qatar, he's like, I ran out of front tires. So it's always that long corner, that direction change, that slow speed where Max has struggled. I'll find the Silverstone video now and show it to you guys. Yeah, so this is into turn 3 and then into turn 4. Max take this wider entry here. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the car just doesn't basically want to turn into the corner. Again, Max's line is not helpful. If you watch the gloves, you'll see the hands disappear for a second while he does a bit of work at the wheel and then corrects. I think this is exactly the situation and complex and sequence of corners where these regs are going to be more helpful. In that slow speed direction change, the lighter car will help Max. I'll show you another shot. Yeah, this one here, it's the same thing, but an overhead. You'll see Max comes our way as much as possible and then turns in and doesn't meet with the apex. That's not healthy and not good. So like I say, 2026 cars are going to help Max a lot in this area. Now, in terms of the high speed, the Aero, again, I feel like Max is a little bit handcuffed, or one of his skills is going to be handcuffed a little bit. If I can just jump over to the telemetry and show you guys the magic of Max through a set of S's. I'll do that for you guys now. This was 2024 qualifying in Austin, Texas. Max in blue, Lando in orange. I think Lando just got pole. But what I want you to focus on is the track dominance. You see Max mega through the first sector. That's why it's painted blue. And then towards the back of the track, the slow speed, the clumsy stuff, Lando is a little bit better. And in the last two corners. But have a look at the telemetry and look at the throttle. This is where this big story is. You see Lando's getting off throttle here in the S's, off, 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 whereas Max takes the first part flat, flat. So that's turn 4 and 5 flat. The speed that they're doing here, guys, is just on 280 Ks. And that's when in that year 24 and 25, downforce is significantly active. And Max could just destroy. You see the delta come in Max's favor there. So I feel like with the regs that we got now, the Aero taking a back seat, one of Max's strengths has been capped a little bit, and one of his weaknesses will be resolved for a little bit. Now, the big question is, will the tight line still be a play? If you're familiar with the channel, we speak about this a lot. A tight line basically says that you don't use all of the available track width on entry. Rather, you're a more conservative line, a step inside. And that can just put less load through the car. It's also really helpful in direction change across a significant track width. That's slow speed as well. There are different cases where it can work into long corners, like I say. But yeah, the question is that still going to be a thing this year? Let me jump you guys over to the whiteboard and I'll explain what happened in 2025. So what we'll do is we'll use Hungary final two corners as our best example. Again, if you're familiar with the channel, you've been here before, you'll know it. So normal line, geometric line, what everyone does is try to come across here and reach this entry position right up against the edge of the track and then turn in from there. The problem is when you do that, the direction change puts a lot of strain on the outside, front left and front right. So you can get understeer or oversteer on the entry there. The tight line says you're not going to find that entry position. You're going to do everything the same, but keep the car straight and then just go in like that. So you're a step inside a step tighter. Now in 2025, the problem with this was, like I highlighted to you guys in green, that area up there where the car just can't deal with it. They're so big, they're so heavy. Remember the slow speed understeer situation, the change of weight from one side of the car. Remember when you're turning left, the weight is coming all that way. And then when you turn to the right super quick, the weight goes all on that side. So you've got that, yeah, again, just the weight and the roll of the car and the center of gravity and the front tires and everything, the track width, it can't deal with that input. So this tight line was a solution. So you don't need to do that. In fact, if you just go in, you'll find the car's a lot happier to go in. A lot more stable, a lot flatter, a lot squarer to the road on the entry. We'll just go in, good front grip and so on. Drive less meters, as you can see as well. It's a less fast line. What I think is going to happen in 2026 will be interesting, because I don't think you'll have the downforce or grip to actually get your foot down and make it over there in the first place. So that's the challenge. The downforce in 2025 and just how quickly you could get your foot flat out of such a corner meant that you had time. Like if you're flat from here, you had time and grip to drive over there if you wanted to, but you didn't have the front grip when you got there. You're not going to get your foot flat there. It's going to be like squirming a little bit under traction. Remember, you've got heaps of power and no aero or very little aero. And so I think by the time you get the thing rotated and flat, it's almost time to turn in again as well. So I think the downforce, as we're talking about aero and downforce, I think it's going to be a struggle to actually get over there in the first place, which means, again, is the case for the tight line. You don't need to get over there if you don't want to. Just as we're still talking about chassis, a couple of other things I wanted to call out. The curbs, I think these cars will be a little bit better in that area, just generally speaking, a softer ride. Remember in 2025, the stiff, the heavy, the floor, they wanted to keep everything as straight and as stiff and as uniform as possible. And that just meant that they're not great in terms of riding curbs like Canada, Monza, Imola. The drivers were actually scared when I watched them, in my eyes, to just touch and try curbs. There was no curiosity. If they touched the curb, it was like, whoa, better not do that again. And even at slow speed, they just didn't want to go near them for the discomfort and upsetting that aerodynamic platform. I think this year you're going to see that, next year in 2026, you're going to see that a bit better situation with the lighter cars. Just generally, they won't need to be run so stiff. I think it'll be a step in the right direction there. And hopefully we see some good technique in chicanes with the first entry curb, unloading inside front, the compliance, the contact, everything, working as it should. So I think we'll see that in terms of curbs and curb usage and compliance. With regards to traction, this is interesting. We just spoke about that on the whiteboard. The thing is, there's a lot of power and not much downforce, not much aero. So if you just looked at that, you'd be like, traction is going to be a disaster. The thing is, half of that power is battery, and that battery can be electronically controlled, how it comes in, when it comes in. And so if you were an engineer mapping that power delivery to the driver, in that example I just showed you on the whiteboard, you're not going to just give the driver the whole 350 kilowatts of battery when the car's not even straight, the downforce is not even built. Why would you give it that? You're going to be limited by traction. So you'd rather like not deploy it there, wait until the car's straight and moving, and then deploy it there, for example. So I say all of that to say traction, if you just looked at the power and the grip, you'd be like, yeah, traction would be a problem. But then I think the way they map in that power and how they, engine modes, engine mapping, battery modes, recovery, deployment, throttle shapes, throttle maps, they'll be able to get on top of the traction, I think. I wouldn't be, if I had a car that was giving me the extra battery there, I'd be like, I don't want it there. It's problematic. There's no straight. I've got no grip anyway. Just give it to me like down the pit straight. So I think they'll do that. They'll map that in, to come in gradually, the battery and the power to come in gradually and come in neatly. And I think it'll be more of a challenge therefore in the high speed, like let's say on the exit of Stowe, for example, exit of Pouon, for example, another one where in theory, the engineers will be like, yeah, on the exit of Pouon, give the battery, but then it's going to be actually quite hard. You're still turning and on throttle, like it's going to be a lot of power that's going to come in, for example. So again, I think the engineers will just have to just massage that in. You don't want it immediately on the initial throttle contact. Got to wait until the car's walking forward for a few car lengths, straighter, squarer, with the aero coming across it first before you give it the full 350. So I think it would be a problem, but I think they'll get around that with mapping. I think one of the biggest struggles, like I said, will be high speed entries, but also decreasing radius braking zones. If you're not familiar with the 7 technical corners, it's on my website. I recommend you brush up on them. But decreasing radius braking zones are when you're turning and braking at the same time and the speed comes down, gradually decreasing radius, and you're turning and braking at the same time. That's going to be a challenge because, again, you're firing in there with a lot of speed and no grip to go with it. We already spoke about the long drawn out braking zones, and now you're turning. So corners like turn 1 and 2 in Suzuka, it's the cross between a double apex and a decreasing radius. It is decreasing radius as well. And so turning and braking and downshifting there from like 340 is going to be a massive challenge as well. So I think, yeah, hopefully I've just covered a few areas for you: traction, curbs and compliance, and just the struggle with no downforce in decreasing radius braking zones. We need to talk about the wet just quickly as well. I think with the smaller tires that we have, less aero from the floor, generally speaking, visibility should be a lot better. You know, these monsters in 25 just created, they threw a lot of water up into the air. So with having less downforce, it's helpful in terms of visibility. So I think that's a step in the right direction. But again, quick cars, no grip in the wet, another big handful, another massive challenge and massive handful. Again, I'm all for that. And that's what drivers get paid to do is, demonstrate their skill in cars that are not quite hooked up to the road, So I'm all for that. But I think the biggest implication will be, that they're going to be quick in a straight line, a lot of battery power. What we spoke about before in terms of feeding in the battery power, those maps and the rate at which that energy gets fed in is going to have to be very patient and very slow in the wet. The car's going to have to be moving forward for quite some time before you give it the full boost of the 350 kilowatts. So yeah, I think it'll be a challenge, but easier to follow, easier for visibility. It'll be safer. Just as I say that, on one hand, it's safer. You can see more. On the other hand, there's less grip and more speed. There's going to be a driving challenge as well. I think it should be safer in the sense you'll be able to see things, which is better. So just in wrapping up here with the aero and the mechanical side, the implication on overtaking, like I say, you'll be able to follow better. Lighter cars, smaller tires, less floor downforce, more downforce generated from just the upper elements of the car. So aero wash is going to be less, disturbance is going to be less, the cars will be able to follow. That's a tick. Slipstream is also going to be less effective though. So when you've got a draggy car punching a hole in the straight in front of you, a big hole, a big car with a lot of downforce, to get in that slipstream is valuable and helpful. Whereas if you've got a slippery car in front of you, then it's not punching as big of a hole in the air. I think slipstream will be less effective with smaller, less draggier cars. So it's like a pro that you can follow, but the slipstream won't be that powerful. The longer braking zones that we spoke about, I think that would provide an opportunity as well for overtaking. You don't want high downforce cars where the braking zones are very short, very snappy. Like in, say, Spain turn 1, they're braking at like the 75 in 2025 this year. Like 70 meters before the corner. How are you going to outbrake someone? There's no braking zone. But you bring them in here now, 340, open up that braking zone. The cars have got a lot of braking to do, then it gives you more opportunity to outbrake someone. So I think that's good. So I'd say in general, these regs will promote closer racing and more opportunity for overtaking from that standpoint before we discuss the battery, the overtaking, the driving techniques with regards to the battery and how that can influence as well. That's a big topic as well. So let's get into it. Strap yourselves in. This is where we're going to start to talk about the battery, the overtakes and so on. So the overtaking mechanism for this year is manual override mode. It's essentially extra access to energy, not more energy, access to energy. That's the key part here. This is where things are going to get really complicated and really confusing for the average fan. Hopefully with this video, you have a clearer picture. Drop me a question or comment if it doesn't make sense. But I've been trying to understand this a lot as well. And this is where I think F1 got itself caught in a web, because like you change one thing and it ruins another thing. So if you fix that, you mess that, and it just becomes a little bit of a strange kind of puzzle, because the DRS was, all they had to play with really was the length of the DRS zone. But now you've got to play with the harvesting, the battery, the deployment, the speed, the length of straight. Every track has its different challenge in terms of harvest and deployment and so on. So this whole thing is going to need to be variable. So DRS is replaced with manual override mode, access to extra battery. If you're within 1 second, that rule's still the same. Got to be within 1 second of the car in front, bang, you get access to the extra battery post 290 kilometers. Let me bring you guys over to the whiteboard and I'll show you guys in a drawing. I might explain it a bit better. Okay, so you can see that on the screen in front of you. This is a very simplistic model and it does get more complicated than this, but let me walk you guys through it. So the battery that's being charged under braking can harvest 8.5 megajoules per lap. That's fine. And then on the straight, you can deploy that in terms of 350 kilowatts up to a speed of 290 kilometers. Now, if you're the attacking car, like I say, and you're within 1 second, then you can continue to use that 350 as denoted by this green line across here. You don't have the energy turn down rate, which means that if you're not an attacking car within 1 second, your battery has to follow this taper down to 0 kilowatts, basically. So anything post 290, that's when this energy turn down rate, or taper, as I like to call it, happens. So hopefully that's clear in saying that the attacking car doesn't have more battery, it just has access to battery in this zone. But the key part here is if there is actually charge to deploy. So just on that note, presumably there is enough charge. Like presumably this harvest of 8.5 megajoules is enough for someone in front to deploy and follow this taper, such that you can also deploy and then continue attacking using the manual override mode. So there needs to be enough harvest for this to actually be a thing. Remember, it's not extra battery you're getting, it's access to battery. So you need to be able to comfortably mirror the battery of the car in front, and your advantage is the access. If that's not the case, right, and there is a battery harvest game going on and the car you're attacking and even your car can't harvest enough for what it's deploying, then obviously the teams are going to play with this deployment. They'll push it out of the corner when the drag is low, squirt the car out of the corner, and then just turn it off. And no one has extra access to battery, or you have extra access to a value of 0. So that would be problematic. So you need the harvest, the deployment, and everything needs to work hand in hand, such that there is actually an attacking battery available to you that can either accessed or not be accessed. So like I say, if that's the case, then the advantage is neutralized, because the car ahead will just deploy heavily out of the final corner and defend the main attacking area. Plus the slipstream is weak. Plus you've got this taper as well. So they still have something post 290 kilometers anyway, and there won't be much overtaking in that case. So like I said before, every track has a different requirement and characteristic, because every track's harvesting amount and deployment amount is going to be slightly different. So I think they're going to just have to adjust these, and we'll get over to the variables in a second. But Silverstone jumps off the page for me because it's extremely high deployment. There's a lot of full throttle time there. That's how Max got pole in 25. You just take the downforce off. There's so much full throttle time that most of the lap time in Silverstone for Max was just coming free of charge when he kept his foot flat. So that's a high deployment track. And crucially, there aren't long braking zones. So it's going to be tricky to harvest your battery back in a track like Silverstone. I think Spa jumps off the page as well, having a similar problem. Obviously, Monza, Baku, Jeddah as well has a lot of full throttle time in Saudi Arabia as well. So it's important, therefore, that they play with these parameters and make sure that the limitation is access and not volume. And that's very important to call out at this point, like I said before. So to that end, the FIA is starting to make all of these parameters variable. They're starting to play with these things and say, well, on some tracks, we'll do a different taper. On other tracks, you can harvest more. maybe deploy the 290 kilometers. Like it's all going to have to be a big mix, a big pie at the end of the day. So yeah, they're going to have to select the values, I think, before each weekend for harvest rate, deployment rate, the speed at which the taper begins, and then what type of taper they play around with. So let's jump over to the whiteboard now and have a look at some of these variables. Hopefully you guys will stay with me and understand what's going on. But as you can see, this is the diagram now where the variables come in. So let's start to talk about harvest rate, for example. So I said it was 8.5 megajoules per lap, but they're also considering the option of 8 or 5 megajoules per lap. And that's how much energy you harvest, you recover under braking to charge the battery. So they put this out there, these different numbers, to stop drivers from milking extra battery in and extra energy in places where they shouldn't be, like down the straight, pressing the brakes, or lifting and coasting a lot to try to charge the battery in a qualifying lap. So what they're trying to say is, well, it doesn't matter if you keep lifting and coasting and braking and downshifting to charge the battery. The most you can charge is 5 megajoules, so don't play any games. That's fine if they select that number for qualifying, and that's the intent of it. But like we said before, your attacking advantage is access to battery. And if you don't have battery, then there's just no point. Like the whole thing doesn't make sense. I hope that makes sense. I hope you understand what I'm saying. If you cap that harvest rate for quali, so the guys don't play games and harvest in places they shouldn't be, then you've got a problem in the race where no one's got battery. So what's your overtaking tool? So the quote actually from Tom Bartas, the FIA, if I just read it out to you, Tom Bartas has explained that the catalyst for this change was that the FIA did not want drivers to have forced into extreme behavior on qualifying laps, such as having to brake hard on straights in random places. Quote, we wanted to make sure that for qualifying, we didn't make it necessary for them to do any recharging on a straight. The best way to do that is to say the energy they can have is limited. Therefore, they can obtain that energy in a more natural way and not need to do any shenanigans on the straights or brake early or anything like that. It is to protect qualifying and make sure it's a pure expression of aggression rather than energy management. And like I say, if this is Silverstone, for example, and you're only giving the guys 5 megajoules, in the race, you will run out. And then you got a big problem. So that's the first variable, the harvest rate. Second variable, the turn down ramp rate. That's the taper that I said before. Post 290 kilometers, they're playing with how quickly the taper comes off. And again, this is a web, like F1's got itself stuck in a little bit of a web here. So the two proposed tapers are post 290 kilometers, the energy drops off and goes to 0 after 7 seconds, or you get a quick short taper that drops off after 3.5 seconds. So the idea with the 7-second taper is that in tracks like Monza, like we said, where there's long straights and long deployment, you essentially don't want the car to go from 290 kilometers and then have lost half its power just quickly all of a sudden come straight down like that, because then the speed differential you're going to create is huge. So what they came up with was, let's taper the energy off post 290, 7 seconds. That's fine, but that's actually still a lot of battery. It's like using a lot of battery as well. That's the first thing. Then if you go for the 3.5 second taper, you will be left without battery down a straight like Monza, for example. And so then you get the speed difference and speed discrepancy. So if I exaggerate and I give you guys, say, a 14-second taper or something that looks like that, again, you can see it's just, yeah, the battery that's being used is huge. So there's obviously not enough for that. So yeah, at some tracks, they're going to pick a 3.5 second taper or a 7-second taper. So I'll jump you guys over to the telemetry in 2025, and we'll just have a look at, how this could look in theory. So this was from this year, Silverstone. Again, for me, this is a track that's really going to struggle because there's only a handful. Stowe will barely be a braking zone. Vale, turn 3. There's only like tops 4 braking zones. But the amount of times that the speed goes post 290 kilometers is here, here, and here as well. There's a lot of full throttle time, a lot of deployment therefore. So low harvest, high deployment. Now, the thing is, that's with these cars this year, 2025. Imagine when they got heaps more power and no downforce, they'll get to top speed even quicker. They'll get to that 290 even quicker. So if Max here in this pole lap got to 290, where you see the white dot here, there's an argument to say that potentially they're going to reach that speed even sooner. Particularly get out of Luffield, for example, they're going to hit that speed straight away. So it'd be crazy. Like that taper of 7 seconds won't be enough to get you to stow without running out of battery, guaranteed. Now, look, it wouldn't surprise me if this becomes another variable, as in it's not just the 3.5 or the 7-second taper that they choose from. I think they'll just pick a number each track. This week it'll be 4, next week it'll be 7, and next week it'll be 10, and they'll just play with that. But anyway, that's your second variable. It's the energy turn down ramp rate or the energy battery taper post 290 kilometers per hour for a normal car that's not the attacking car. Remember, the attacking car has manual override mode. So the third variable, which at the moment is not a variable, but I think will be a very important variable, it's the 350 kilowatts of max deployment. I think the FIA proposed 200 and the teams rejected it. I'll get onto in a minute. But I think that does solve a lot of problems. If you can just bring that down a little bit, then you're not going to run out of battery so quickly. You can run the 200 for longer, and it just gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of for how long you can run at that rate. So I think that whilst it isn't a variable at the moment, then keep your eye on the max deployment. I think this possibility that again, this is the third variable. I think the possibility that every weekend they just pick a number and this week the max deployment is 250 or who knows? But at the moment, it is fixed at 350 kilowatts. And that is the max deployment that you can do. So I'll show you guys the image from the race. This was a quote about the change from the 350 to the 200. And it says, earlier this year, a proposal by the FIA to reduce the power from the standard 350 kilowatts to 200 kilowatts in races only. It would remain unchanged for qualifying, which would in theory help cars deploy their energy for longer, was rejected by the car manufacturers as they did not feel it was necessary. Whilst that is off the table for now, it's something that could be looked at again, depending on how things shake up when the cars are seen in action for the first time earlier next year. Tom Barter said, "We believed it would have been a sensible step forward, and some teams also believed that, but it didn't get enough support among the PU manufacturers." So you can see that we're in a bit of a web here. It's like the harvest rate is not enough for the deployment rate, and the results of it all, when it's all messed up like this, manual override mode is not going to be effective. You're not going to have any battery. You'll have access. You'll be able to walk through the battery door. There's nothing in the room. That's going to be the problem. And then you won't get overtaking. So then it's the question, do you want overtaking? Do we need overtaking? What if the cars can follow, but then the slipstream's not powerful? And it's all a big web. I think we got ourselves into that web when we selected MOM, manual override mode, as the overtaking mechanism. Now, the fourth and final variable, which I think will probably change as well, or could change, is the post 290 kilometers as well. Like I said before, on tracks, they might hit that speed so quickly that the taper happens so quickly and it's all over. You're out of battery pretty quick. So either they change that number, bring it forward, or push it back and play with that. Again, I think it'll be another variable. At the moment, though, it is fixed. Every single track, you only get access to MOM past 290 kilometers. Some tracks, that's more valuable than others. Like in Hungary, you'll only hit that halfway down the straight. Whereas in Silverstone, you're going to hit that pretty early. So again, I think all four of the variables are going to have to be tweaked track to track. Your taper, your speed at which you get MOM, your max deployment, and your harvest as well. Now, look, this will be complicated for the average fan. The way I see it is like, do you remember when they brought out the 5 or 6 Pirelli compounds? And it was C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6. But every weekend, a different tire rocks up to the track. But as for the fan, it's always called the soft, the medium, and the hard. It's going to be a little bit like that. There's going to be so much stuff going on in the background. But unless you're truly dialed into the sport, you're not going to know what the taper is, what the harvest is, what the deployment is, or what the speed at which MOM. You're not going to know that. You're just going to know that on the straight, someone has access to MOM if they're a second in front. And I think that's where it becomes like, do the fans need to know? Is it too complicated? Like, I feel like it is. And they're going to start to be asking questions like, how come last week they could pass and this week they can't? And you're going to have to pull up this diagram and explain that. So it's going to be a challenge, like pretty much like the Tyres was. Like, one week the C5 is the soft, the next week the C3 is the soft, and they're both called soft, but they're completely different tires. And so we've been able to get away with that. But I think this is a more complicated version of that. Essentially, everything will be shuffled in the background and you'll just see whatever you get on the surface. So the reason I'm telling you about this, the attacking mechanism, the MOM and everything, there are some opportunities in driving techniques in terms of how to harvest. And so we will get into it in a minute. Before we do, I'll just fill you guys in on the engine and the fuel. So we've got a lot more power. I'll just quickly show that to you guys now as well. So yeah, in 2022, we had 560 kilowatts from the actual combustion engine and 150 kilowatts from the electric. That created 710 kilowatts. Now in 2026, we're going to have less from the combustion, 400. We're going to have heaps more from the electric, 350. So that's a 750 combined. There's your more power. The fuel, we've gone from 10% renewable fuel, which is this year, 2025, a combination of 10% renewable and 90% fossil fuel, to now 100% sustainable fuel. So we've jumped from 10% renewable up to 100% renewable, entirely synthetic, bio-derived, meaning no new fossil carbon will be burned. The carbon is captured from the atmosphere or non-food biomass, making the fuel essentially carbon neutral. Cool. The other thing to call out with regards to the engine, no more MGU-H, the turbo. That was used to help charge the battery and spin the turbo electronically so that there was no turbo lag to match the throttle. That also made the torque delivery nice and smooth and predictable. With that gone, a couple of implications are back. The turbo lag is back. The turbo is created by the shaft deceleration. And in my opinion, the good drivers will prevent shaft deceleration as opposed to try to solve for it when it happens. So again, taking a line that keeps the minimum speed high and keeps the shaft accelerating and has a small time between when you come off the throttle for braking, when you go back on throttle, you want to minimize that window as much as possible, as well as keeping the minimum speed high to keep the shaft going around as well. So I think the turbo lag will be a challenge because it'll feel like there's no power, but then it will come in with the turbo and the battery. And so managing that on the exit will be a handful. And the second thing, the most important thing, is every joule of energy of harvest will come from now the MGU-K, which is the rear brake regeneration. And therefore, braking zones are your fuel stations. Every single braking zone now is an opportunity to harvest energy. And that feeds me into the opportunities section of the video. So given that it looks like there'll be a discrepancy between how much you can actually harvest versus how much you can and want to deploy, there's your opportunity. It's basically, how can we steal the most energy under braking? Let's talk about how the brake harvesting actually works. Is it the length of the braking zone? Does it suit a latent hard style? Like, how do you actually charge this battery? Is it time on the pedal or the downshifts or the lift and coast and so on, the intensity and so on? So the braking force, the deceleration that you get, it's going to be from the MGU-K, which is the regenerative torque. That's limited. It has a limit, but it charges the battery. That's the important one. And then you've got the friction from the brakes as well, which is virtually unlimited depending on grip. So my understanding of how this works is when you get off the throttle, the MGU-K can bite into the shaft and decelerate it and then charge the battery that way. So it essentially acts as a braking tool, and it slows the engine speed down and then feeds power back to the battery that way. And like I say, it's limited as to how much you can get from that, how much battery charge you can actually get from that. So the points to note: off throttle lift and coast is going to be a big thing. I think we spoke about long drawn out braking zones because the speeds are so high and the downforce is so low that you're going to get these braking zones. But I think the reality is there'll be like a lift and coast zone where the MGU-K can slow the car down, and then you'll hit the brakes, and that braking zone, the braking zone, might actually be short, but the total deceleration zone might actually be long. So I think this will be a challenge because it can produce inconsistent braking points. Remember, it's not just now about your braking point. It's about your lift point, your lift speed, your coast, then your braking point and your downshifting and so on. So I'll just draw that out for you on the track map so it's clear. So let's say, for example, Spain turn 1, 2, 3, kind of goes something like that. Now, ordinarily, you'd have a brake marker over here, let's say the 100-meter board, and the guys will just fire up to that. And then let's say they brake just after that. I'm making this up. Let's say they brake at the 80-meter. Bang, there's your short braking zone. Cool. Now, this year, I think, sorry, 2026, I keep saying this year. Let's say there's the 250 board over here. There'll be a lift period where you start to lift off the throttle because that's going to charge the battery in that period. When you lift and get off the throttle, the MGU-K is going to be able to bite into that and help decelerate the car. So you're going to have a lift period. Now, the thing is, when you do that, you can actually push your braking zone later. So instead of braking at the 80, where you tear into, you attack the braking zone, the speed comes down in the lift period. The MGU-K is getting recharged. It does a lot of work. You can go past this braking point. You need to find a new braking point, maybe at the 50, for example. Again, I'm making these numbers up. But essentially, that's how it's going to work. There'll be a lift point and a braking point as opposed to just the braking point. Now, we have that now, but a difference in extent. So we're talking about trying to milk as much battery as possible because you've got that big 350 kilowatts that you need to deploy and the harvest rate. So you need battery. Again, it looks to me like it's going to be about getting battery as opposed to getting access to battery. So the good driving techniques will be, to lift off at the right time, charge the battery the right amount as much as possible. And then on the exit of the corner, let's say you come through this sequence, turn 1, 2, 3, then you deploy that, for example, on the run down to turn 4, and that's going to help you massively. That will be a quicker way of driving than if you were to just brake at the 80 and not recharge the battery, not have that whole orange section there. So I'll show you guys how this looks in telemetry because I did a bit of lift and coast braking technique just for my own practice a long time ago. So yeah, again, this was Spain turn 1. And what I want to show you guys is there's a blue line and a red line. These are the throttle traces. And the brake traces, red and blue as well. And let's just look at the red because that's a very normal situation where you drive up to your braking point. You see you lift off the throttle and go on the brakes. Very normal. And you're not going to get any charge there except for that little short time you're on the brake. That's it. Whereas in the blue, with the lift early, like we said, back at the 250, there's going to be a recharge that happens there from the MGU-K. And then when you push the brakes, there's a recharge that happens as well. But the braking zone, you can see, is very short, very compressed. So what I spoke about before in terms of having long braking zones for good overtaking, maybe not with the battery when you view it through the recharge and the battery lens. Maybe it's just going to be just at which point you lift, can you drive past this lift point and attack in the deceleration phase? I think we need new vocabulary. It's not a braking phase anymore. In fact, that's very short. It will be a deceleration zone, which is mostly a lift and coast, and then a little bit of braking at the end. Now, given that the drag is low, you're going to be firing in here at a lot of speed. So therefore, it could be a really long, drawn-out lift and coast zone to recharge the battery. There might be downshifting in there, but there might not be as well. It just depends on how much the MGU-K can actually do the braking for you. You might not want to downshift. You might just want to let the MGU-K do it. But there is a limit. Like the MGU-K needs revs in order to feed, it needs to bite into something. So if you just lift and go down, yeah, the MGU-K will do a lot of the deceleration for you. But if it falls into a zone where it's suboptimal, the MGU-K is not getting the revs that it needs to be able to bite into that and charge the battery, then you pull a downshift, the MGU-K can now re-bite into that engine speed and re-decelerate the car that way as well. So there'll be a bit of you have to just work that out as to timing of the downshifts to make sure that you're optimizing the charge back to the MGU-K. Now, it's important to note that the front brakes contribute 0 to the energy recovery. It's all from the rear brakes MGU-K at the back of the car. So depending on how powerful that is, and the corner types and so on, I think, again, there'll be a balance to be struck there in terms of how much braking has come from the MGU-K? How strong is it? Do we put, how much do we put with the rear brake? And then how much do we put with the front brakes? Given that the charge is like, it looks like it's so strong in terms of how much it can actually pull back. It doesn't look like you've got a big battery, but it looks like the harvest can be big and the deployment can be big as well. Then I feel like the MGU-K will be quite strong and they might not need to run much rear brakes in that situation, mostly be coming from the front brakes. But then you saw how small that braking zone was, right? When you lift and roll into the corner, the speed comes down and just push the brakes for a little bit as well. So the MGU-K will be doing most of the braking, I think. So like I wanted to say, and I was going to say that there's a technique in terms of braking to get the most out of the battery. Like, do you brake late and hard and keep your braking zone short and compressed? Does it charge based on potential and power? Or if you brake early and soft and just squeeze the brakes and go longer period, does that help charge a little bit more? I feel like the lift and coast is going to soak up so much of that story that the braking zone is already, compressed, like as you saw with the telemetry. And it will be, but then again, you're coming in with a lot of speed as well. I think it depends on the track and the corner type and so on. Hopefully that's a story, because then you'll see a bit of driving technique. For example, Oscar, we know, likes to brake late and hard. So does Lewis, for example. Whereas Lando modulates the brake a little bit more and will squeeze it on a little bit more and create a longer time on the brakes, for example. So energy is power times time. So there might be a balance to be struck there. And if harvesting the battery is the limitation, just play with your braking technique to just get as much juice as possible. It's just literally about stealing battery under braking. So I'll show you guys some telemetry from Mexico just to highlight that difference for you in terms of the McLaren driver's technique. So Oscar was struggling in Mexico this year. And if we look in orange, Lando Norris in orange, you see he comes on the brakes first, earliest compared to Oscar, and then carries that brake for longer than Oscar. My question is, is that a better way of braking to charge the battery as opposed to Oscar in white, a later, harder, shorter, sharper braking zone? And I guess my conclusion at the moment with the information I have is that's going to be quite small and insignificant. The lift point back here will do most of the charging and then the brakes. So when we talk about braking now in 2026, you can't have that conversation without talking about the lift as well. It's going to be very important. Where do they lift? Where do they brake? That is going to be, but I think that might be engineering led. It's going to be like you need a lift here, because you're going to get a certain amount of charge. You're either charging too much or you're not charging enough. So change your lift point. They'll work that out in practice. And then the brake, you're left with the smaller braking zones. I think that might be a shame, but I feel like that's the way it's going to go. The other thing I've thought about is riding the brakes. So going down the straight and holding the brake pedal. I think that will be really inefficient because you'll need bigger brakes. The brakes get hotter. You're using more fuel. You need more brake cooling, you lose straight line speed. I think that's not the way to go. I think that the easiest way to get battery back is just with the speed lift, bang, the MGU-K is going to do the work from there. So yeah, I think that's riding the brakes won't be a thing. Potentially in qualifying though, to steal a little bit more battery somewhere, there might be a little bit of that going on. We'll see how that plays out. Wanted to talk to you guys about some sound bites, some things that you may have heard or not heard, and it's going to be a really weird season. So the first one from Max is that he had to downshift on the straight in Monza when he was flat towards the end of the straight because he ran out of battery and it was better to downshift. Well, I understand how that can happen. Now that makes sense. If we go back to our tapers, again, it's going to be the deployment, the taper, the harvest. That's going to be the story. So let's say, for example, that they were going down Monza and they chose the 7-second taper. Then, at one point you're going to run out of battery because it's a long straight. Even Baku's a long straight as well. So Max is saying, it's 350 kilowatts that you get from the battery and 400 from the engine. You lose this when you run out of battery. So you're only left with this. Max saying, well, the car was decelerating. I had to pull a downshift. So I agree with that. I can see that happening. Yeah, I can see you getting to the end of the straight and pulling a downshift because it's quicker. However, I would argue that you're better off if you're not accelerating and battery is your limitation, wouldn't you be better off lifting, getting the MGU-K to recharge and, you know, get some of that battery back? What's the point of downshifting, keeping your foot flat? You're not getting paid in terms of battery for that. Yeah, you might be moving forward a little bit quicker. You're not getting paid in terms of battery. So I'd argue that that's true. That can happen. But if you lift, wouldn't it be better? That would be my question. Max said that it would be an ICE competition, a more focus on engine and less on the chassis. I agree. It's hard to disagree with him. We spoke about the complex nature of the PU and the whole battery system. It's also going to be about efficiency and how does it recharge? How efficiently does it recharge? We spoke about the 100% sustainable fuel. And yeah, I mean, it could be true. I'm not sure the freedom to which the designers can do on the aero side. Different cars, whether they'll look completely different or we'll get consistency there, I'm not sure. I think it would be hard to disagree with Max. The third one was you're going to see drivers slow down excessively in some corners to rev the engine a lot more, and the engine working hard as a generator in the middle of the corner to recharge the battery. I don't think you'll see this one. I think that the moment you lift off, that's going to give the MGU-K something to bite into. As the speed comes down, you'll downshift and brake and go into the corner like that. Essentially what this soundbite is saying is that you're going to keep braking and keep downshifting to keep charging the battery and then to deploy it later on somewhere else. Yeah, I just don't feel like that'll be feasible. It depends if it uses more fuel, more brakes, more damage to the engine and the variables that they've selected on the track. The harvest rate, the deployment rate, the taper rate, and the speed. It depends if that makes it feasible to go down to a really slow speed to charge the battery. But I think there'll be an optimal there. I just don't feel like it's going to be, you know, if that is the case, I think they'll play with some of these variables to make sure that it's not the case and that you're just going down to the speed you think you need to take the corner. So I don't think that will pop up. Yeah, what the teams will do is reduce the aggressive engine braking map and let the revs decay more naturally and more slowly using the MGU-K to control the shaft deceleration. So I don't think you're going to see it from excessive braking and excessive downshifting. I could be wrong there. I could be totally off there. Let me know if you guys disagree or what your thoughts are on that. I just don't think we'll see it. And if we do see it, I think they'll iron that one out. We need to talk about active aero now as well. So there's a lot of change, obviously. So as at 2025, you'll be familiar with DRS, ability to open the rear wing, less drag reduction system, and attack the car in front. Now, however, given the context, which is that there's a difference between how much you can harvest and how much you want to deploy, there's a big delta, a big discrepancy across there. They've taken the incentive to create what's called active aero, which means both the wings are open. And it will probably be in the DRS zones that we had this year or similar. So in long straights where it's safe to do so, where both the wings, front and rear wing, can open up and you're going to get mega straight line speed. So again, I think that's battery-driven decision to try to make the cars more efficient, more effective, and be able to hold on to some of this battery to create the difference that the attacking car gets access to battery, not volume to battery. That's going to be a huge conversation because if we're both limited by volume, having access does nothing. So you want to have access to battery charge. So what they're doing with the active aero is just trying to, instead of them being flat for 10 seconds down the straight with heaps of drag, open the wings, you're only flat for 8 seconds down the straight. You're going to use less battery that way. So you've got 3 different modes that they're playing around with. Straight line mode, when the wings are fully open. Cornering mode, when the wings are down and you take the corner. And a partial active aero mode as well, which they're planning to use for shorter straights or mixed conditions and so on. It really looks to me like they're trying to squeeze every inch of battery saving and harvest back into the battery. You can tell that by the introduction of the straight line mode, active aero, but also now this partial mode. And they're thinking like, is there a place where we can just open the front wing and not use too much battery? And that's essentially what the partial active aero is. This is the normal rear wing opening that you would have seen. That's like the DRS. You'll get that, but you'll also get the front wing moving as well. So straight line mode is when both of them are open, and the partial is when just the front wing is open. Interesting point on this. Max said that it was fully automated. He's like, I don't have control. It's just going to open when it opens and going to close when it closes. And Max is like, that's not good. And I agree with him 100%, because there are times where he might want to control it manually. Mixed conditions, following other cars, and might not want the front wing up when you're following, or yeah, there'll just be different situations where intermediate on dries, or dry in intermediate, wet, slightly wet, or drying, etc. Yeah, there'll be times where they want to manually do that, manually control that. So I agree with Max. I think it should not be automated. It should be manually done by the driver. But then you run into the problem of like the Jack Doohan thing, where he forgot to close the DRS in turn 1 in Suzuka. You're going to get that as well. It can happen possibly as well. So again, like I said at the start of the video, we're in like a web here. You fix one thing, you mess another thing, and we kind of just feel like we're going around in circles here, but it is what it is. So listen, we got testing coming up, and as I learn more about these regs and get a bit of an insight, I'm going to share that with you. And we've got live streams booked in on the channel. If you go to the live section, live tab, you'll see the live streams booked in. The first test is a private one in Spain, Barcelona. And I understand why, because they're going to try to want to work out this whole, this mess over here. To the left of your screen. So that's why it's a 5-day private test in Barcelona. It'll be cold. It's a lot of increasing radius corners there, so traction will be a problem, particularly turn 10. I don't think it's going to test too much like front grip or decreasing radius, braking zones or curbs or direction change or anything. Mainly going to be an insight for them on how the batteries are working in terms of the harvest deployment balance, and the traction, how that power comes in, how they feed that in with the engine and throttle maps. But then we're going over to Bahrain for test 2 and test 3. So that'll be more, we'll get a better picture there. That's the first public test. That's the one I will be following and posting videos about as well. Now, I put out on my YouTube for you guys to ask me questions about the 2026 regs, and now I'm going to answer them from you. Thank you for sending them through, because yeah, they give me an insight into what you guys are thinking, what questions you have. They open my mind. They make me think about things as well. We got something like 55 questions come through. I'm only going to answer 10. I took 10 that I thought covered other questions that most people wanted answered, and that hopefully I haven't answered in this video as well. So let's bring up the questions, your questions now, and just quickly run through them together. Okay, so this is taken from the YouTube. The first question is from Felipe Sartori 3905. The question is, do you think Hamilton's driving style will be more adapted to this kind of car? The reason I brought this one up is because everyone wants to know this. And I hope we spoke about it. I covered it fairly well in terms of from the vehicle, from the vehicle dynamics, from the mechanical side, the smaller cars, shorter wheelbase, less aero, lighter cars. I think that's definitely up Lewis Hamilton's alley, because it creates a situation more like Monza in Canada and shines a light on the braking zones. I think in qualifying, if Lewis is confident and happy with the car and everything's in place, yes, this will suit. This directly speaks to Lewis's late, hard, aggressive entry braking style. Yes. The question is, in the race, we spoke about the lift point, the braking point, and how that braking zone compresses, and maybe intra-qualifying lap, there is a bit of that lift and coast going on to charge battery in places. If that's the case, then you, again, like similar to Max, you're handcuffing Lewis's skill. So then maybe not. We'll have to see how it plays out in qualifying. But I think that'll be the lens through which we answer this question, because, yeah, it'll be in qualifying, will be the best chance to get the longest braking zones with the most top speed and so on. That's when it's going to shine a light on braking technique the most. Next question from Scott Moore 9583. Do you think any driving techniques, specifically tight lines or short corners, will be used with the new regs? Yeah, so we spoke about the tight lines briefly in the video. I think that that's such a powerful technique with so many advantages that there's always a reason, there will always be a reason and a use case for it. Either the cars are too heavy with too much downforce, in which case the front won't want to go in, or the cars are lighter with no downforce, they won't be able to put the foot down, so you're not going to have time to get across to where you want to go. So that directly speaks to a case for the tight line. So I think yes, for that one. Short corners is an interesting one, which I haven't, honestly, it's too hard, too early for me to tell in terms of, you know, braking later, deeper, targeting a later apex. I think the benefit of the short corner is that you don't combine your elements so much. So you're not braking and turning into the corner. You're pretty much braking in a straight line, stopping the car, rotating the car, and then going again with straight line traction. So I think if the cars are lacking for aero, then yes, this will be a thing. It just depends to the extent on how short the short corner is going to be. For example, in the wet, you know, there's definitely a case for short corners. I'm kind of on the fence about this. You know, in 2025, this year, it wasn't really a technique because when you would stop the car, you'd drop the downforce out of the car. So then it doesn't work. The whole ground effect, keep the minimum speed alive, keep the aero active through the middle of the corner. That was the key. So I don't think it was a good technique in 2025. However, in 26, as we said, there's not much aero. Yeah, I think it does point a lens a little bit more to the short corner thing. You got to remember Rob Wilson's short corners were very pre-crazy levels of downforce. There was old school, you know, wings were starting to be developed. It was that era in like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s where there wasn't that crazy. That's where the short corner technique came from. And it was so valuable because the cars weren't good at taking corners. In 25, I was like, it's not a thing anymore, but maybe it comes back now. And again, it's a difference in extent. Like how much do we use it? How short is the corner? I'll be watching this story and yeah, we need a long corner of constant radius to really suss that out. Your first one would be Spain testing turn 12. However, we're not going to be able to see that. So I'm just trying to think the track map now. Where's the first long corner of constant radius? You guys might know better than me, but there's definitely ones in Hungary, Netherlands. So yeah, Spain. So yeah, I think that'll be the first one and probably the first time that we see whether or not a short corner is effective. The third question is from @sum2NW. Will drivers make a difference, i.e. dealing with less downforce in fast corners and go flat compared to everyone going flat with the 2025 cars? Yeah, so what you're trying to say there is if there's downforce, it's easy flat. Like Cops, Pouon, Stowe, Eau Rouge, 130R. These are easy flat in 2025. I guess what you're trying to say is, will the drivers make a difference when the downforce is not there? 100%. The cars are going to be moving around so much in these high-speed corners, they're not going to have the downforce or grip. Yes, it does shine a light more back on the drivers, and that's why I'm all for it. I think it's very good. What I would say is just correct you ever so slightly. Remember the 2024 telemetry in Austin? There were still times and places where some drivers were able to keep their foot flat, like Max, where Lando wasn't. So he was still there, but you'll see maybe more of that, more anticipation, more bravery, more risk, more. Yes, I agree with your question. I think, yes, drivers will make more of a difference in that high-speed entry. The next question comes from @MAK790. Hi, Martin. Which driver best demonstrates your driving philosophy in terms of style and technique? Could you give one current driver and one from the past? I'm not great with the past driver. Like we had less information and less data and less videos, and there are onboards out there. I think like 98 springs to mind. Hakkinen and Schumacher, they were driving very tight lines in Hungary, second last corner, because again, no grip, no aero, but very strong engines. So the driver from the past, I can't give you an honest answer. I might have to skip that part. And from the current crop, it's interesting because I take different pieces from different drivers. For example, I love Max's high-speed commitment. You know, when downforce is significant, go after it. Max's short corners in the wet, absolutely that works. Charles's tight line to take pole in Hungary in turns 13 and 14, you know, demonstrates one of my big driving styles and philosophies as well. So it's kind of like Fernando Alonso in terms of racecraft, attack and defense and strategy and restarts. I think Fernando demonstrates that as well. So I can't give you one, whether it's Max's wet or Charles's tight line or whatever, but it's spread throughout the grid. There are drivers out there that have a bit of each of my philosophies, which is interesting, and I try to call them out where I can. The next question number 5 from the Joel Proctor says, do you think the new regs will close the gap between the Red Bull car number 1 and Red Bull car number 2? That's a really good question. So you're talking about, Max hammering his teammate, whether he hammers Tsunoda, Lawson, Albon, etc., Gasly, and so on. It's a good question. It's a really good question, isn't it? Because I think in order to answer that, you need to understand what their problem was. Why was Max able to be so good in that car in that era that the other drivers couldn't do? Was it thing in long corners? Was it in S's? Was it in minimum speeds? Was it lines and wets and braking? What was that issue? Again, it's could be different for each of those drivers, and therefore will that be an issue again this year? So, for example, if we say it was Max in the high speed with the downforce, he was so good. Well, he won't have that in 2026. The downforce that the cars generate's not going to be enough. But then you can look at that both ways and say that's an opportunity to optimize and maximize that. Or you could look at it from another way and say Max is not going to be able to take advantage of downforce because there is no downforce. It depends which way you look at it. I mean, the honest answer, it's a really good question. The honest answer is I don't know, but I'll be following that story. And again, we changed drivers now. So if we left Yuki in, that would be a fair test with regards to the new regs, but we've changed Yuki now. So how do we know whether it's Hajar's just better, for example? The other thing you could say is, well, it's the front grip. Max loves that front end and the car that rotates in the corner and the drivers can't deal with that. That one I think won't be such a big thing in 2026 because the car is just going to be such a handful in the high speed and under braking and on throttle and so on. I think that's another case for the tight line, by the way, guys, in decreasing radius corners, being a step inside just to not overload the outside of the car and take wide entries. You don't have the grip for that as well. I think there will be tight lines under braking as well, just as a side note. Really good question. So there's a couple of thoughts. I hope I helped. Question number 6 from Joseph Johnson. Do you think the regs handling characteristics will naturally go towards understeer or oversteer? Because I personally think it will go more towards understeer due to the rumors that half the top teams are using double push suspension, and also the regs will be about overbody in-wash aero more. Again, another really good question. You're talking about this on the whiteboard. So whether the cars will naturally go towards understeer or oversteer, you're talking about what we drew before, the aero balance when the downforce comes on the car. I think in the slow speed, it will be fine, neutral, but you're right. Is it going to be oversteer or understeer? That's why I think we're both on the same lines here. Which one is it going to be and how much exactly? Go back to your question. I think it could be both, just depending on the corner type, for example. So, and it could even be both in the same corner. It just depends on the corner type, really. Like in Stowe, in Silverstone, for example, or Cops, such a fast entry, probably not going to get understeer, but you might get oversteer on the exit. But then in braking to slow the car down in Brooklands, for example, maybe it'll understeer. Again, back to my diagram, I've got both as being, it's going to be a handful for sure. Whether or not it's understeer or oversteer, I'm not sure. This is why it's a good question. And you're saying here the rumors more towards understeer due to half the top teams double push rod. Well then, yeah, if that's the case, then maybe it will be high speed understeer, which might then play into the Max thing as well. And, we know he hates that. Yeah, really good question. I hope I gave you some thoughts, and I can't give you something solid because at the end of the day, I don't know. And this diagram is the best I have at the moment. Question number 7 from Alberto Fusari, I70. Hi, Martin. I'm interested in how and how much do you think the drivers will influence manage engine power mode selection between different sections of the laps? So you're talking about battery deployment, I guess, around the lap. This is not really a driver thing, If, let's say you're not within 1 second, not the attacking car, then it's going to be a very engineered thing. It's going to be a very calculated, very optimized solution. How much harvesting are we getting and where is the best place to deploy that? And they say, okay, We'll deploy that for 3 seconds out of turn 1, 4 seconds out of turn 2. The short straight here, so just 1.5 seconds there at these speeds, at these times. Bang, that's optimal, because that's at the time where the throttle's flat, the steering wheel is straight, the speed is forward, and the drag is low, crucially. So the engineers will pick that, and they'll just tell the driver, okay, go to this mode setting, and that's it. So I don't think the drivers will influence that. Where the drivers will influence and manage the engine power mode will be with the manual override mode, where they've got that button, that push to pass button. When do they use it? Where do they feel their attacking opportunity is? Do they harvest for a few laps and go for it, or get close in a certain section to then attack in another section? Or how they prepare the overtake and manage the battery with the manual override mode will be initially a driver's call, and maybe the engineers will come back and say, hey, try this. But I think it'll be a lot on intuition on that side. So yeah, I hope that helps. I hope I answered your question. The engineers will work out where the optimal place to deploy it is. Question 8, it's a big one from Basil Kehoe. In my eyes, we will have a harder time harvesting, less contact patch on the tires, less underfloor area, and more aero on the top side. A softer ride than ground effect cars, and a different way to set up the car with downforce with manual override mode. Do you think that the drivers should be more focused on changing their style to get the max out of the PU and the electric, or being able to be more aggressive with less downforce and slow speed? I think Max will do pretty well with his ability to adapt, and I think that Lewis will do better with these new regs. I also feel Lando will benefit with the less grip and show off how smooth he is, like Button, but not the great lines of all time. Am I crazy for my predictions, or am I onto something? Thank you, Martin. I love all of your content. You're the best. Thank you. That's a really good question as well. And I think you're on the right track, to be honest, with most of it. You're essentially saying, are they going to be more focused on changing the driving style for the PU, like to harvest the most energy, or is it just going to be about the pure driving? Unfortunately, our only hope is qualifying, that there's enough battery and you don't need to charge it during the lap and you can just go for it and attack the racetrack. However, I feel like there might be lift and coast in quali to steal a bit of battery for somewhere else. That's how powerful it is, right? The battery is half your power. So if you don't give that consideration and you're going to run out, it's worth it to adopt a driving style to feed back the battery and keep recharging and deploying during the qualifying lap, unfortunately. I hope it's not like that. I hope that there's enough in there that the driver can just attack the braking zones. I would hate to see lift and coast in a quali lap. So yeah, however, in the race, it goes without saying, I think the driving style will be dictated by the PU and the electric. Being able to charge your battery, manage your battery, form your attacks, and drive economically, unfortunately. Our only hope is quality, and we'll wait and see. I agree with everything you say here in terms of Max's adaptability and his ability to problem solve. Tick. Lewis will do better with these new regs. Tick. Lando will benefit from the less grip and show how smooth he is. Tick. I think you're onto something. So yeah, definitely a good question. Thank you. Question number 9 from Toko9518 says, 2026 reg equivalent DRS is the extra battery power, right? I'll stop you there. It's not extra battery power. It's access to get to battery power is the key to the lock to get into battery. So it's not extra battery power. No, I think the word access is very important, because if you and I both don't have battery, access is not helpful. It's access to extra battery power. For DRS regs, we saw DRS trains because everyone kept using DRS lap after lap. Do you think they will only turn on the DRS equivalent when an overtake is certain? I guess you're talking about, the manual override mode. Do you think they'll only go for it when they can? Otherwise, it's a waste of crucial battery energy, no? Yes, and this goes back to the other question about where do the drivers deploy and where do they attack and where do they think the right opportunity is? Do they use it down a short straight to get close, and will it have enough down the pit straight? And yeah, it's going to be definitely a conversation and question track by track basis and where they feel like the best attacking, overtaking opportunity is. So yeah, I agree with you. I think you only want to use it where overtake is certain. Obviously, you want to make the overtake using as minimal battery as possible. That's the goal and objective, right? So yeah, that's how you'll do it. So you'll push it. Let's say Barcelona down the pitch straight. Once you hit 290, you can push it, get the extra battery, make your overtake, but crucially, you got to turn it off once you feel like your overtake is done and try to keep it. I think that's all fine. I think the bigger challenge will be, is it a battery access thing constraint, or is it a battery volume constraint and a recharge constraint? Because they're two very different things. The last question is from Brian Luke 8591. Hi, Martin. I've been testing F1 2026 Gen cars in Assetto Corsa, and while I know the mods are still immature, they do hint at something. With the new 50/50 ICE electric, the difference in power between deployment modes could be unprecedented. Even in the sim, I've felt sudden surges that are hard to manage, especially over bumps and curbs where the extra torque can trigger snap oversteer. If this kind of issue really exists in actual cars, how will drivers, teams, FIA deal with it? Will mapping, torque, blending, and controlled electronics be enough to smooth out such a massive difference in deployment compared to previous generations? Again, a really good question. I think the answer to your question is yes. It is so electronic. It is so dependent on it's half the power. And I agree with you. It's a lot of power. It's very strong, but it's so easy to control, no? Because it's electronic. So you can map that in at the right time. So the only time where it would be a massive challenge is if you've got heaps of battery, unlimited volume. Then the question then becomes, we want to get that in as early as possible, right? So I'll try to bring you guys over to a track map to explain what I'm talking about here. So let's say, for example, you've got unlimited battery, heaps of battery. Then I agree with you. The challenge will be, as you come out of turn 27 in Saudi, you want to deploy it as quickly as possible and deploy all of it there, and then take the chicane. And even before you got the car straight, keep deploying. And here in this high speed, who can get away with keeping the battery on through here, or how early out of turn 10? And so then if the volume is not a constraint, you'll get this heaps of power all the way around the track. Then I agree with your question. I say yes. If volume is not a constraint, then the cars are going to be on edge. But I think what's going to happen is there will be a lack of volume, i.e. not enough battery. And so what the engineers will do is say, okay, we'll deploy a bit out of turn 27. I'll do it in red so you guys can see it. We'll do a bit out of turn 27. Cool. Then the drag gets too high. I don't want it. And then maybe a little squirt here. And then another little squirt of battery here. Okay, out of 17 and 18, we'll give it a big deploy there. And then down here, out of 23, 24, we'll give it another deploy there. And so when you look at that, because volume is a constraint, you're not going to have the battery problem in the high speed. It's not going to be on edge, because either they're not giving you the full 350 kilowatts. The engine mapping will give you only what you can deal with. So it's a really good question. I just feel like it's so electronic that they'll be able to map their way around it. The thing is, like I say, if volume is not a constraint, it'll just be about who can, that gives you carte blanche to just write the battery wherever you want. And so then it will be a handful, absolutely. Imagine going through Puon, and then on the exit, the moment you go for the throttle, you're going to get that full power. Then obviously it's going to be unnerving, but I think over time, the teams will get around that, get their arms around that and map it in a comfortable way for the drivers with the throttle shape, engine mapping, power modes, everything you say here, torque bleeding, battery deployment, and they'll smooth all that out, I think, so they will become more drivable. It'll be on the tracks where harvesting is very high and deployment is very low. Like, let's say, for example, Hungary, that you've got now extra battery, spare battery. What do you do with it? Where do you deploy it? Where I think this is what you say is going to be a conversation. Like some of the S's in Hungary might be the only place where, what do you do with this extra battery if you have it, for example? So then the Hungary, middle sector might be the only place you can use it. And so then it's going to be a balance. Like, the car is actually going to be on edge in those corners because you've got the volume, you haven't got the straights to deploy it comfortably. So on those tracks, I would agree with you. Yeah, 100%. So a really good question. I think track by track, it'll be a conversation, again, based on the harvesting volume and the deployment. And I just have to manage that and make sure it's being deployed in the most optimal places. But if there is an excess, the question will be who can deploy it and still keep the thing on the road. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something from it. Again, this will be a story that evolves. Maybe I didn't get everything 100% at this time, as at the time of writing, December 2025. As we get more information following the Barcelona test, I'll give you guys more updates and we'll be able to see now where we went wrong or where we went right, what our assumptions were and why and so on, and we'll take more steps forward together. So definitely drop me a thought or question or comment in the comment section below, and make sure you put the notifications on for the live stream where I'll give you guys updates, and I'll see you guys there.